All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the technical meeting organized by the AACE. Tonight we are having the webinar number 6 of the year. My name is Fran Vera. I am the events coordinator, and I will be the host for this session tonight. Before moving into the webinar itself, I'd like to share with you some items and the agenda for tonight. We're going to see the meeting procedures. I'm going to talk about the AACE International and the Australian section. We're going to explore a little bit about the website that the AACE International has for the project management community. And tonight we're going to talk about the international certifications and how to recertificate. And then we'll move on to the webinar. We're going to talk about the documenting the estimate basis. We're gonna have final questions to the speaker, and at the end we're gonna have a little bit of networking. Everybody will be allowed to unmute themselves and speak to each other and probably discuss further details of the webinar. In terms of the meeting procedures, all the attendees, of course, will be muting during the presentation. If you want to make any question, you can do it through the chat box using this feature that Microsoft Teams has for us. We're going to make this webinar available. We are recording the session and we're going to share it to the YouTube channel, and we're going to send the link through an email afterwards as well. You're gonna have access to all the slides that we are showing for you tonight. If you need or want to get a certificate of attendance, please feel free to email us to info@aacei.org.au, and we'll be happy to send you a certificate. A little bit about the AACE. The AACE stands for the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering. It serves the total cost management community since 1956, and it is committed to the constructive exchange of ideas between members, committed to the development of technical guidance and quality education through the recommended practices, frameworks, and even courses online. And is also committed to the recognition of subject matter experts through a set of certifications recognized internationally. In Australia, we have a committee made up of a president, vice president, and etc., as you see in this slide. But we are also spread all over Australia. We have a representative person on each state, almost on each state. We have Lou Vidotto looking at the Queensland area, and he's the vice president as well, and he'll be the speaker tonight. In New South Wales, we have Alberto Sanchez. In Western Australia, we have Alan Crow. At the moment, we are open to receive people who wants to join us. We have some available positions, such as the membership secretary, reporting coordinator, training, and developing coordinator. If you think you have 8 to 10 hours per month to volunteer with us and help us to promote the cost engineering knowledge, please let us know so that we can discuss further details. As I mentioned earlier, we normally speak before every webinar. We explore a little bit about the AACE website and just to see what it has for us. The last month we spoke about the international certifications, and just a brief reminder. Last month we spoke about 3 different levels of certifications. All of them go in accordance to the level of expertise that the professional has. We have, for example, technician level certifications offered mainly for early career professionals or recent college graduates. And if you have more experience, you can apply for the professional level certification as well. We have very good certifications there, like CCP, EVP, PSP, and so on. But tonight I wanted to focus more about the recertification process. If you go to the AACE website, we'll find the information about all the certifications that the AACE offers, but also we're going to have a tab showing what to do if we already have a certification and we want to renew it. And you'll find that we have mainly two ways to recertificate. First, through the examination. This option will require you to go through the application process in the same manner as you are in the beginning when you apply for a new certification as a new candidate. But the other option is through the accumulation of 12 CEUs, 12 continuing education units, it is called. We have to accumulate 12 of these over a 3-year period. And we can earn these CEUs through 4 separate categories that I'm showing in this slide. Categories that goes from A to D. Category A is related to the experience, professional experience about your employment in the industry. It has to be related to project management, to cost engineering, and you can earn 2 CEUs per year. You can accumulate a maximum of six EUs in this category. Then we have the category B that relates to the professional development. You can earn a maximum 10 CEUs, and it is related to the professional development and continuing education. In other words, the participation in webinars or online learning courses that AACE offers through its platform. Category C is focused on the contribution that you may have to the industry. For example, if you wrote a paper, you published a paper, or you contributed in a AACE webinar, for example, that may count as well to get some CEUs. And finally, the volunteering service. If you are part of the AACE committee, for example, or any other project management organization, you're also eligible to get some CEUs. In order for you to renew your certification, if you have one, you'll need to get at least 12 CEUs. And you have here a set of different options to get them. So one more information, you can visit the websites that I'm showing in the slides, and you'll get all the information there. And if you need help in the process, feel free to email us. We are going to be happy to reply as soon as we can. Okay, now please welcome Luis Vidotto. He's going to present about documenting the estimate basis. He will discuss the recommended practices that details how to document the cost estimated basis that are mainly focused on 2 recommended practices. And that will be it as the introduction. Lou, I'm gonna stop sharing, and welcome to tonight.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
Yep.
Now, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for attending tonight. Firstly, just a bit about myself. I've been working on projects for over 40 years, projects around the world in various guises. Most of my career has been in project controls, ranging from cost engineering, planning and scheduling and estimating to project controls manager. I've spent the first 3 or 4 years out of uni being a structural engineer, and then I got the opportunity to work as a cost engineer with one of the international companies. And I loved it. So I think I found my home being a project controls person. So that's where I've spent most of my time ever since. I'm an experienced project estimator. I've worked on and built many estimates, right from small projects up to billion-dollar projects, and participating in especially a lot of reviews and analyses of those estimates, and I'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. We've developed a project controls training program to share experience, knowledge, and basic skills to our profession. So tonight, what I'd like to do is go through some topics. The agenda is I'll do a brief introduction, talk about why we do estimates, talk a bit about the estimate process. Work breakdown structure is a key part of any project, and especially in the estimating part. Types of estimates, and then why document the estimate. And that's the crux of tonight's meeting, why documenting the estimate. It's an essential part of the whole estimating process, and I don't think that we do it very well, and I'd certainly like to share my experience. I'll talk a bit about contingency versus accuracy, and certainly then questions, throw the discussion out to questions. What I'd like to do during the presentation and the discussion is, if you have questions, please use the chat function, and Frank will facilitate questions, and I'll answer them as best as I can as we go along. And then certainly at the end, we'll have an open mic, and we can talk as much as you like about anything to do with estimating. Okay, introduction. So I recently sat through a training session on estimating. One of our clients has developed a framework for managing their projects, and the presenter was fantastic, and she knew all about the estimating process. She knew all about how to apply it, how to work it in the context of the company that she worked for. But what I felt, and judging by the questions, was she lost the audience in the process. And what do I mean by that? I mean that running through the estimating process is very, very important to get the answers that you want to get out of it. But it's also understanding why you're doing the estimate the way you are, and what you want to do with the information. And I think that's, from tonight's view, I don't want to teach people how to estimate. I think there's lots of fantastic AACE information, but it's why we need to effectively document an estimate, and why it's so important. If you look at the basis of estimate, people talk about doing it, and at the end of an estimate, it's the key output from the estimating process. And what do you do with it? And certainly I'd like to talk about that. And it's from an estimator's point of view. Again, I'd just like to iterate, I've built a lot of project estimates, I've done a lot of estimate reviews, and the information and the building of that base of estimate is so important. So that's what I'd like to share with you all tonight. So why do estimates? When do you build an estimate? It's a simple question. At every stage of a project or a study. I think we all know that an estimate is meant to reflect the cost of a study. It's certainly meant to be the basis of a tender or for a project, and it's based on the documented and quantified scope of the project. What do I mean by that? What's the project that you're estimating really like? What does it cover? What strategy are you going to use to build the project? And it has the strategy for building the project has real implications on how you build the estimate, and certainly how you build the schedule. And the schedule and the estimate go hand in hand. You can't divorce those. I've worked on many projects where the planners and schedulers don't work with the estimators, or with the project team. And so you get disjointed information that at the end of the day doesn't help to deliver a successful project. I think everybody's seen information about project overruns and schedule overruns. And I think one of the root causes is that we don't build the base information during the study effectively. And certainly it's not only capturing all the information, but it's documenting it, documenting what your assumptions are, documenting what's not in the estimate, and documenting qualifications which are around how you've built the components of it. If you know that, you've got a good starting point for your project or your study or your contract. And again, the basis of estimate is it. So at any point, building an estimate is meant to reflect the cost of a study or a tender based on the documented and quantified scope, the study, the execution strategy, the schedule for the project. If you're a contractor and you're building an estimate, it's really going to be around what the pricing schedule says, which is the way that the client wants you to build, wants you to tell him the information that they need for how much that project or that contract is going to cost. And certainly, one of the things that I found in my experience is that the pricing schedule for contracts is an important function, because you're able then to relate how someone prices a contract back to how the estimate was built for comparison purposes. And also then leading on to that is how you actually measure progress, measure for progress and measure for payment. So at the start of an estimate function, you've got to build an estimate plan, which really spells out how you're going to build the estimate. And it says what are you going to do about labour rates? What are you going to do about productivity? What are you going to do about how are you going to address the state of the development of the quantities and the engineering? How are you going to tackle the contracts and all of those sorts of things? So they set out the assumptions at the start of an estimate, which tells the project team what information you need from them and how you're going to build up the estimate. Then once you've done the estimate at the end, it's really how you've done it, what the output was from that estimating process. If you look at the project life cycles, this is just a document that my business uses on projects. You've really got a project life cycle, and it says that at the start of a project life cycle, you've got an owner or a government body or someone who wants to develop a project or develop a community piece of infrastructure. And they say, okay, this is what we need to do. These are the parameters. Let's develop a business case and a strategy. So they really want to have an idea of what an estimate's worth. So at that stage, you would probably do just an empirical estimate based on historical data, other bits of information that you've got to pull it together, and you start doing some block estimates. And then that leads to pre-feasibility studies where you have many options and capacities related to achieve the business case. So out of that estimating cycle and study cycle for your pre-feasibility work, you select the most appropriate option that reflects what the business case is. Then you go into a feasibility study and you actually develop that study, develop that project. If it then doesn't meet what the business requirements are, or whatever, then go back, recycle. So again, owners really want to know, or government bodies really want to know how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take. So the estimating process, and related obviously to the planning process, tells you that. So once you've got a feasibility study that's satisfies what the business cases are. You might need to go through a financial closure stage. A lot of government bodies, for example, have money that they allocate once the project's approved. Mining companies historically don't have money. They've got to go out and get funding. So it depends on what your project is. Project readiness, while you're waiting for financial close, is get your systems and processes up and running, your detailed planning, your project preparation. A couple of months ago, we had a presentation done by IPA on the status of project controls on projects. So one of the things that they found was that businesses that have a project controls organisation in place with systems and processes have a much better chance of a successful project rather than one where they have to build it once the project starts. That's just a bit of information. Execution phase, build the project that's been approved and then do a project closeout. Now, building the project that's been approved is going to rely on the way that the estimate was built and the way that the schedule was built. And again, the basis of estimate is really the document that spells out what the budget is for that project. And I'll talk a bit more about that.
Lou, before moving into the next slide, I have a question here related to the previous slide.
Sure.
Lauren is asking, what is the relationship between cost forecasting and cost estimation? And at what stage in the life cycle are they appropriate taking into account the time lapse between business case and the operation itself?
Many answers to that question. Firstly, I'll tackle estimating versus cost forecasting. Yeah. In a project environment, once you've got your budget set, which is based on the estimate that was approved, you would then go and set up your change management and forecast the changes to the budget based on the change management, based on the status of your contracts and your purchase orders. And they're all going to be either over or under budget, or your services costs are going to take more or less than what your estimate was, and your budget. At some point in time, during, in particular, the execution phase, and once engineering's progressed to the parameters we always use were, once engineering's progressed to 60 to 70% complete, you've awarded your major contracts, and you've got some experience in the field, you would then redo the project estimate, which means you start from scratch, get a new dump of quantities out of your engineering, and re-estimate the project. So if your forecasting is good, and when you do the re-estimate of the project, in an ideal world, they should be pretty close. I remember we worked on a project many years ago, and it was a fast start off, and the estimate was built by another organisation. We inherited it. So the first thing we did was set up change management and started trending against the budget. So when engineering got to a point where we could redo the estimate, it came to within 2 or 3%. So again, so we're getting a little bit off topic, but certainly the change management program is an essential part of the project cycle. And in order to do change management properly, you need to be able to estimate the value of changes. The second, well, sorry, just repeat the second part of the question, Frank.
Yeah, at what stage in the life cycle it is appropriate to take into account the time lapse between the business case and the cost of the operation?
Really, as project controls professionals, we should always be focused on what the business case is. We tend to very often get caught up in details and getting a monthly report out or a cost report out or a schedule report out. But ultimately, we need to make sure that the project is still adhering to or working to what the business case is. So it's no particular time, it's really right through all of those phases. If for example, in the feasibility study, if the estimate comes up too high, when you do your NPV calculations and it doesn't match the business case, you have a problem. In your execution phase, if you start getting delays and overruns because you're for many reasons and you're not meeting the business case, you have a problem. So each of those stages in the life cycle need to refer back to what the business case is. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Well, I personally understood that. So.
Okay. Okay. So why do estimates? Certainly a number of reasons. If I'm a project estimator, I want to make sure that the estimate we build secures sufficient funding to deliver the project. And I'll talk a bit more about contingency towards the end. And also estimate to do options analyses to support and prove the business case. If I'm a contractor or a vendor, I'm going to do an estimate as a tender or a bid. And again, it has a contractor's bid or a contractor's estimate has different parameters and different tensions on it than a project estimator. If I'm a contractor's estimator, I've got to make sure that what I put into the bid is enough to build the job, and also be transparent enough so that my commercial people can make the call on how much contingency or margin to put in. And again, the basis of estimate enables you to do that. The commercial tension I put on, it's giving your organisation the ability to say, okay, well, I understand what the estimate has in it. I understand what the qualifications and the good bits are and the weak bits. Okay, this is what I think we're going to go ahead with on the contract. Why do estimates again? Ultimately create a budget. You want to make sure that when the estimate's approved along with the project, you can create a budget. And again, you want to make sure that the estimate's built in a way that you can create a budget out of it. So, and I think I'll talk a bit more about work breakdown structures. This is just an extract out of the AACE body of knowledge, and it talks about very quickly on this page, talks about planning for the estimate and budgeting. Quantities, you must have quantification so that you can actually build an estimate. Then price the cost estimate. You've got to understand how to price it, price the quantities. One of the things that you need to do when you set up your estimate plan is be specific about how you want the quantities taken off. If it's a project estimate, so you want your engineers to be able to tell you the quantities by your code of accounts so that you can estimate it. If you're a contractor, then certainly the pricing schedule in the bid document, you need to be able to understand what's in each bit so you can price it appropriately. And then develop and maintain methods and tools. You need an estimating system of sort. You can rack up the estimate so that you can get quantities and hours and material costs and equipment costs, etc. So pricing the cost estimate ultimately leads to a budget, and then also to the budget cost by work breakdown structure and commodity and work package enables you to do a cash flow in the schedule. So again, reinforcing the link between the schedule and the estimate. I've worked on projects where the estimators and the planners work in different rooms. And I think that's something that as project controls people, we need to be aware of all the time, that the estimate and the schedule go hand in hand. When we build an estimate, we've got to be able to transfer that to the planners so they can actually work up the durations and the manning levels, etc. Review and document the cost estimate is the basis of estimate. And I think that's what I'm going to focus on through this little discussion. The estimating process. This cartoon I've used forever and a day in training, and I think it really captures what we're trying to do in terms of defining an estimate. So I'll quickly just run through it. How the owner explained it. So the owner said, "This is what I want to build." How the project leader understood it. Okay, a little bit lost in translation. How the project leader scoped it out, and then how the estimator managed to interpret what the project leader wanted. How the analyst calculated the NPV. Estimate backup, not there. Estimate backup is the basis of estimate and all the detailed calculations you've used. And then how the owner was built, and then ultimately what the owner really needed. And I love this cartoon because it tells you, it goes from what an owner wants, his business case or his project, to ultimately what he really needed. And it's up to us as estimators to interpret that information properly and be transparent about what he's getting. Okay, so AACE provides the tools and processes to prepare estimates to a certain accuracy and completeness. The recommended practices, they're fantastic, and I can't reinforce enough to everybody to make use of them. A couple that I've used for tonight's discussion is the cost estimate classification, EPC for road and rail, transportation infrastructure industries. And I've on the next slide, I've just copied an image from that. And again, experience provides the presentation of data. The basis of estimate has to tell the true picture of how the estimate was built. Okay, so the estimate process, according to AACE, says that a Class 5 estimate is based on 0 to 2% of engineering, or they call it project definition, but people interpret that to a degree of engineering done. End usage is concept screening. How do you do it? You do cost or length factors, dollars per kilometre of rail or dollars per kilometre of freeway or tunnel, or parametric models or judgment or analogy. The expected accuracy range is -20 to -50 to +30 to +100%. So what does that mean? It means that the estimate you come up with, if it's done okay, it should come within that range. And the other thing to highlight is that that's at the 80% confidence level, and I'll talk more about that. A Class 4 estimate for a study or feasibility is 1 to 15% of engineering. Again, cost length factored or parametric models. And again, you would expect the range to be -15 to 30% and +20 to 50% in that range. Class 3, 10 to 40%, and ultimately ending up with a -10 to -20 and a +10 to +30 range. Right down to a Class 1 where you've got 65 to 100% of engineering done, and it's at that stage that a contractor would probably do a detailed bid or tender, and it's detailed unit cost with detailed takeoffs. Low, -3 to -10%, which is pretty tight, and then +3 to +15%. Now, different companies have different interpretations of that. And again, the estimate plan that you build will address what expected accuracy ranges you're going to need to achieve, and also to how much engineering you're going to need to have done in order to achieve that expected accuracy range. Okay.
Yeah, Lou, I just have a comment and a question in regards to the classification as well. Jim says it's an excellent discussion, and most of the clients typically stop the estimating process after the Class 3. And he's asking or he's wondering if you are seeing in the industry a class 2 estimate. Because according to his experience in USA, it seems like the owners don't think it is required, or it is required to run a class 2 estimate.
Yeah.
What's your point of view on that?
My point of view is that it's a mistake not doing class 2 estimates. Right, we tend to get to a feasibility study estimate and create a budget and then rely on change management. And normally projects haven't reached that 30 to 70, or certainly not 75% complete engineered, at which point in time my experience is that we would actually redo the estimate. Now, the estimate consists of forecasting the awarded work and then estimating the unawarded work as a bit of a hybrid. And so if you were to do a true definitive estimate, you would re-estimate the whole job and then do a comparison back to what your contracts and purchase orders are telling you. So yes, we tend not to do class 2 estimates anymore. Should we? Yes, we should. So the fallback position is to really ramp up your change management program to actually take that if you like, take that into account or take care of not doing a definitive estimate. But you certainly need to make sure that your change management program is effective. And it needs to run certainly on design changes and interaction with your engineers and your contractors.
Yeah, and
Okay.
as Andrew says, owners tend to think they're going to save money, but that's a huge mistake. I agree with you, Andrew.
Yeah.
So
yeah. one of my sayings is certainly that I think a successful project is one where there are no surprises. If you haven't got your estimate, if you haven't got your change management program running properly, you will get surprises.
Yeah.
I remember a project a few years ago that we worked on where it was in the mining boom, and each month we were experiencing overruns on equipment and material tenders, and we realised that what was happening was everything that has steel and copper in it was going up through the roof. So we convinced our client project manager that, hey, we've got a problem here because of the rapid increase of steel and of iron ore and copper prices. So I said to him, so we said we need to do a re-estimate of the project. And he goes, we can't do that. So we said, yeah, we have to. We either do it once now, or we're going to suffer death by 1,000 cuts because it's going to keep going up each month. Anyway, we did an estimate and we picked all the bits of equipment that we thought had copper and steel in, electrical equipment and structural steel and pipe, etc. So the project was worth about 1,200 million, and the trend was about 120 odd million, so about 10%. So we presented to the owner, to the steering committee. They agreed it, and then the whole project was a lot simpler because we'd already taken that re-estimate into account. So I think that the change management program and the re-estimate program is very important.
Yep.
Okay, keep going. Work breakdown structure. Look, I'm not going to dwell too much on work breakdown structure, other than it's the common structure between the scope, the execution strategy, the estimate and the schedule, and then the commodity code structure is the common work activities in each WBS. And it groups like items for estimating and contract pricing and progress measurement, reporting and historical data. The commodity code structure is something that really needs to be understood, and I don't think it's understood well enough in all of our industries. We tend to, and that commonality between the same activity in different work packages is pretty key, because again, if you want to feed your change management program, and for example, say on a rail project where it's broken up into different sections, and you're experiencing an increase in imported fill, for example, on one section, then by hell, you're going to experience that on other sections as well. So if you understand what the commodity code is in that area, then you can use the same basis to trend the other areas. So the commodity code structure is pretty important. Companies have different versions of it. I'm used to an alpha code and certainly a hierarchy of commodity codes. And I think that's pretty important. And you need to build your estimate by that commodity code structure as well. And you need the engineers to take quantities off by that commodity code structure. So and I think that's pretty important. Types of estimates. Again, different organisations have a different focus on estimates. Contractors and vendors really rely on understanding what the pricing schedule is telling you, and what the drawings are telling you in order to build that pricing schedule. The focus that the contractors and vendors they have different commercial drivers about margin and profitability, understanding what's not on the drawings that will impact their contractual relationship with the client. And there's certainly different structure and detail between project estimates and tender estimates. I've just put a word in there called reviewability by the owner is an issue that I encounter. I've done a lot of estimate reviews, and I certainly struggle at times understanding how contractors in particular have built their estimates, because they're in a format where it's hard to get that commonality of data and exactly what's in each item in the estimate. And again, my comment is that if I'm a contractor, if I'm an estimator working for a contractor, my basis of estimate needs to be transparent as much as possible, so that whoever goes to review it can understand it. And again, that comes back from the estimate plan, and certainly back with the basis of estimate. So if I build a basis of estimate, I said, this is how I built the labour rates. This is what's in them. This is where my margin is, and I don't have to necessarily tell the client, but this is how I've spread it. This is what I've done with the with growth analyses or growth factors, so that the client says, okay, I get it. It's nothing harder than if I'm reviewing an estimate and I see a labour rate for a concrete worker of $150 an hour, and I don't understand it. I need to question it, and I need to break it up, and that takes a lot of time in estimate reviews. Project managers, EPCMs, EPCs, PPPs, principal contractors, they necessarily build project estimates. They capture full project scope. They certainly use estimate defined and undefined using growth factors. They estimate productivity and potential rework based on historical performance. Building estimates, if you get a price from a contractor for part of your job, that may not necessarily be the right number to put into your estimate, because history often tells you that the cost of rework is not in that rate, in the raw rate from a contractor. And historically speaking, when you're building projects, you know there's going to be some rework. And so you actually put a factor on the rates that are provided. And certainly project managers estimate the interfaces between contracts. Owners are ultimately where the buck stops. So they want to capture the full project scope from their project managers, from their contractors, from corporate, from operations, because the full estimate is really what you need to go for sanction to build a project. Certainly an owner would have a responsibility matrix that says for each WBS, this is who's doing the estimate, and this is how it's going to be built up. An owner certainly would have a management reserve in terms of the cost and schedule, in terms of contingency, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. They will also have risks built into the estimate that particularly a project manager may not understand, or it's not in his scope to do it. Handover, how much is it going to cost to hand over to your operations? And the other bit too is that an owner will often have a modifications estimate in his total project funding to allow for the debottlenecking and the fix-up once the project manager's handed over. We always used to call it a mod squad. So it's, okay, the project's handed over, but holy hell, we need a safety rail here, or a platform, or this bit of drainage is not quite big enough for the floods, for the water that's coming through. So you have to go through and modify it. And so an owner will often have that an allowance on top of the pure project estimate. So again, a fundamental difference in focus, but certainly when you're building an estimate, depending on who's building it, you have to take those things into account. And again, put it in your basis of estimate. Okay, why document the estimate? I think we're starting to get the picture. AACE defines the basis of estimate as a required document. It's the one deliverable that defines the scope of the project. It can become the basis for change management, depending on the transparency of the information. So you need to build the basis of estimate with the stakeholder in mind. What do I mean by that? Your stakeholders are your owners, the project team. When you build an estimate, you've got to build it in a way that you can hand it over to the project team to build against, and create a budget out of it. Build a base of estimate with the stakeholder for a contract negotiation, so that when you go and talk to your contracts person and you're negotiating your contract, you've got the transparency in there, so that there's no confusion in particular. Another stakeholder for the estimate is the planning team. You certainly have to match the estimate with the plan. Okay, so in the project life cycle, as we go through each phase, we go through concept and pre-fees and fees and maybe funding and execution phase. You start off with capital costs, which are a fair amount of cost estimate that's been estimated, and a lot of contingency. As you go through a pre-fees, the basis of estimate is sort of semi-detailed. So you actually have better definition on your cost and a bit less contingency. As you go through a feasibility study, you do a detailed basis of estimate. So your cost estimate is reasonably well defined and certainly documented, and your contingency is appropriate. Then in your execution phase, you end up actually at the end of the job with actual costs and an historical report that's able to document the performance of that project back against the way the estimate was built. And I think that's certainly in our context on projects at the moment, is we don't capture project costs the way that the budget was built, so we don't get that return data to make the next estimate better to be able to be better estimated. And certainly as you go along and get a higher level of engineering, you should get better definition on your cost, and therefore your contingency comes down. So what do you include in your basis of estimate? And again, this is in the documenting the estimate in the AACE standard, recommended practice. So you've got to put in your project scope roughly, your work breakdown structure and your commodity code structure. You've got to address the execution basis. the planning basis. What do I mean by the execution basis is that when you're building the estimate, you really need to build it by work breakdown structure, by commodity, by contract. Because in a project, it becomes that 3D matrix of project costs. So a contractor might be doing all the civil works, or there might be 2 civil contractors, or there might be a rail laying contractor for the various sections. So you need to be able to compartmentalize those bits of the estimate that apply to each of those contracts. You need to put in the planning basis, which is really consists of things like your labour rate build-up and your productivity, and why you've selected that productivity, and that'll generate the construction hours in the estimate, again by WBS and by commodity, and also too by package. For example, with the construction hours, and certainly by the quantification as well, you should be able to sort your estimate by commodity code, which says, okay, in my estimate, I've got 5 million cubic metres of cut to fill or select fill. And you should then be able to spread that quantity back over your schedule and come up with a production rate per month that you've got to achieve during your project. So again, the real interface between the planning and the estimating. Unit construction hours, how much does it take per cubic metres to install concrete? And it varies between 6 and 15 hours per cubic metre. Steel might take between 14 to 40 hours per tonne, and so on. So that starts to give you the hours in your estimate. So again, what to include, your scope basis, your quantification basis. Estimates are built on quantities, and also transferring, and that enables you to actually measure progress, and then and that ties in ultimately with your schedule too. So you measure progress. How much of your rail have you installed on your railway line, versus how much you should have installed. How much effort is it taken to install what you've done, so you can actually forecast how much is to go. Your cost basis, how were the rates developed? Where did your pricing come from? Certainly in the early phase, it'll be based on historical data, and certainly as you go forward, it'll be based on budget quotes. What are the allowances you've used in the estimate? What are the assumptions? What are the risks and opportunities? And what's the contingency basis? And I'll talk about contingency again because I think that's really important. The commercial basis of the commerciality of the estimate. Once again, if you actually have all of that, the transparency in the estimate build up, then your project manager or your contract managers can say, okay, these are the risks that we've got on this contract. This is the margin we're going to assign to it, and these are the opportunities we've got based on where we think the drawings and the level of design is. So it becomes that commercial assessment of the bid that you put in as a contractor. Sometimes contractors are quite risk averse. Some contractors then say, okay, we're going to go in low, but we think we can get a lot back on variations. It's all of those commercial considerations. Sets the scene for contract delivery. So always discuss the estimate build-up and agree the components. Again, a source of frustration by the reviewer if the estimate's not in a way that you can analyse it. The reviewer gets hung up and has to go and ask questions and try to decipher the data so that they can do an analysis and then report back to their managers that, yeah, I understand the estimate and I think it's okay, or I think there are gaps. We did an estimate for a project a couple of years ago, and one of the components was to build up the contractor's indirect costs. And we did it by component. So when we reviewed it, the reviewer said, okay, I think your supervision's too low, because the estimate was based on one foreman per 7 labourers or 7 directs. he said, I think on our project, because the client involvement is going to be fairly high, we need 1 supervisor per 6. We think you don't have enough people in your project management team, you need an extra planner. So it's that ability to influence the outcome of the estimate by having that transparency in the basis of estimate. So if you can, and again, as you're building the base of estimate, understand who's going to review it so that they can understand it. Qualifications and exclusions, it tells you all about the estimate. It tells you what's included, what's excluded. The owner will always try and do a gap analysis if they're experienced, and I've certainly seen owners that don't because they're inexperienced, and hence they need a good project controls team. And again, that matrix of who's doing which of the WBSs and how well have they addressed all of those bits. So qualifications really says these are my assumptions. These are the labour rates I've used. I've excluded construction water. I'm expecting the owner to supply it, or I'm expecting the fuel to be provided by the owner free of charge, or whatever. So it's those qualifications that really give the flavour of the estimate, and it makes the evaluation really important, a lot easier. Okay, so experience. So experienced estimators really, and experienced project controls people in your team, and it's not just estimators, it's cost engineers and planners. So they enable constructive review of the estimate, and also too, having a good base of estimate prevents confusion and suspicion. If I'm reviewing an estimate and I can't get to the bottom of what's in a labour rate, I get uncomfortable more than suspicious about what's in the labour rate. So what's in there, is it overloaded, is it underloaded? So it's important to actually have that basis spelt out. And a lot of times the reviewer won't criticise or ask for the rates to be changed, but it'll be, okay, I understand it, I understand what you've done, okay, I get it. And certainly to document the assumptions and qualifications. I can't stress that enough. Okay, contingency. I worked on a project a number of years ago where we had a direct cost of about $3.5 billion. When we did the quantitative risk assessment, we came up with a 30% contingency to get to a P50 estimate. And the discussion was around how the hell can that be? But what happened was that the way that the estimate was built, the area engineers and the estimators and all the project team felt like the productivity, in particular, of the workforce was too aggressive or too high. So as we went through and reviewed each part of the risk ranging, we ended up with a base of 30% of contingency. And people were saying, "Holy hell, how can that be?" But it made sense. Now, when they did all of the Monte Carlo analysis, spat out the curves, we came out with a minus 16% to get to a P10 and a plus 46% to get to a P90. So what that meant was that became the accuracy statement for the job, and it certainly gave the contingency. So when you're building an estimate, we normally include contingency at the P50 level. Now, an owner will include management reserve, and it depends what company it is, what they do, either at the P70 or the P90 level, which becomes the management reserve. So P90 says there's only a 10% chance that the P90 estimate will be overrun. And the P50 means there's equal chance of overrunning and underrunning. So when we quote an estimate with a P50 contingency, it's likely that it's more than likely that the number will be, well, it's equal chance the number will be either under or over. It's more than likely that it'll come in less than P90, and it's probably almost uncertain that it'll go down to the P10 number. So that quantitative risk analysis is something that really needs to be done on projects, and when you, in the basis of estimate, quote it and say this is what we've allowed for contingency, and then the owner, or even if you're a contractor and you've done it and they decide, okay, we're going to go in with contingency of X, depending again on the commercial conditions. So that's really important. Again, it needs to be in the basis of estimate. And I think that's probably, oh, here we go. So yeah, again, estimate stated P50 contingency. AACE states the range to P80. My experience with many companies is to quote the accuracy to the P90 and P10 level. Again, that's agreed up front in the estimate plan, so there's no confusion when you actually come to quote the estimate. So variability in accuracy ranges, this is just again out of the recommended practices. So a class 5 estimate will have a huge range on accuracy going down to a class 1, and progressively as you go through class 3, 2 and 1, the ranging gets a lot tighter, and I think you can see that by the way the estimate ranging on the classes in one of the previous slides showed. That's pretty much the end of my presentation. I hope I've shared some of my experiences and things that are important to me, and hopefully are important to the people that are listening. Certainly, I'd like to now ask Frank to open it up to questions.
Yeah, let me read one comment that John Boyle had some minutes ago. He was commenting and saying that he finds that the accuracy alignment of classes that the AACE offers is a little bit confusing for him, because the only thing that determines the class is the engineering deliverables, because the risk is not included on the classification. It's just a comment that he has. You probably have some other comments to respond that.
Yeah, look, certainly. I'll just go back to that slide if I can find it. That one there. So certainly the classes of estimate. The important bit is to agree up front, I think, what accuracy you're trying to achieve, and there's different ways of doing it. It's certainly so class 3 is something I guess we're all pretty familiar with. So 10 to 40% of engineering. If we think that 10% of engineering, if it's a fairly simple job with straightforward quantification and there's no and proven technology, or it's fairly straightforward in terms of a linear execution phase, then maybe 10 to 15% of engineering should be enough to give you an estimate that's within that expected accuracy range. And it is a bit confusing at times. You've got to take a bit of a punt at the start about where you're trying to head, and certainly with experience you'll know how much engineering you've really got to do, and how much you've got to actually price of the estimate to get the certainty to get within the expected accuracy range. On a minerals mining and minerals project, you can get fairly good, improve the accuracy by the way that you're taking the quantities off and applied growth factors, and also to how well you've priced the major bits of equipment. So that really improves the accuracy of it.
Yeah, yeah. As you said, it depends on the industry we're doing the estimate in. Well, I'm gonna move on to another question that Morteza has. He's proposing a case. If you're updating an older estimation, would you recommend updating the basis of the estimation to include factors such as the escalation factors, the
Yes,
foreign exchange
absolutely.
rate?
Yes, absolutely. I haven't talked about escalation. If you attended the presentation we did, I think last month with John Holman, escalation is a key factor in any estimate. And an escalation is really not about the change in the inflation rate for the country or the place where you're working. It's about what conditions have changed that are going to impact the estimate. If you suddenly get into a period where you've got a lot of projects being started or in execution phase, it's going to impact yours. So yes, if you're updating an old estimate with, you need to update the base of estimate with the new parameters.
Yeah, and you can visit the AACE Australia YouTube channel, and you'll find the John's presentation explaining everything about the escalation, the forgotten risk.
It was fantastic. One of the things that he said was, if you're working on a project and suddenly a similar project in terms of size and complexity starts in your region, the cost of both projects will go up 10%. And he talked about the chip factor, the 10% factor.
Yeah. All right, I think we are just about to finish. We are running out of time, and thank you, Luis, for your great presentation. It was very insightful as usual. And now I think we're in good timing to start open the session for everybody. If anyone has any comment, question, we can start commenting and discussing more things. Do you want to say any last words, Lou?
Look, thank you very much. Estimating is something that I really enjoy doing, and I think it's a key part of project controls. And I think that as project controls professionals, being able to pull an estimate together or understand an estimate and a schedule is very important. So if you get the opportunity, grab it.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to stop recording right now so that we can move on to the open mic session.